Everyone, I call the Senate out of recess, call the Senate to order, and recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the late session.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. So we are now in the early session. We're going to somewhat break from protocol and recognize Senator Whitley to introduce some very special guests.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like you all to join me in welcoming the fourth graders from Maple Street Elementary in Hopkinton.
Good morning, everybody. If you can stay for the prayer and the pledge, that would be great. So let's welcome our chaplain, Father Lawson. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Father Stephen from St. Anselm College in Abbey. Always great to be with you. Let us bow our heads in prayer. Loving God, as we gather here today in these hallowed chambers, we come to you with hearts open to wisdom and compassion. Grant those gathered here discernment, that their decisions be rooted in empathy and the common good. As these senators debate on matters that impact our state and its people, may they be mindful of the sacred trust placed upon them. Bless their deliberations. Grant them an open ear that listens attentively to one another, respecting their colleagues and staff members. Guide their actions. Illuminate their path with wisdom, so that they may enact laws that foster a society where all people can thrive and bring peace and prosperity to all citizens of our great state. In your name, O merciful God, we humbly offer this prayer. Amen.
Senator Whitley, could you and our very special guest, Jackson, join us to lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I just have to say this before all of you leave. I've had the honor of sitting in this chamber many times for a long time, and I think some of the people who've been here the longest, like Senator D and Senator Carson and others, would agree that one of the coolest moments that we ever have is when we have a classroom of fourth graders join us in the pledge. So thank you very much. You made my day. Senator Lang for introduction of guests.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to introduce the Legislative Youth Advisory Council who chose to join us today. These are high schoolers who come in and hear about bills we're going to be voting on and give recommendations to the House and Senate. I'd like to introduce the Chairman, James Tebow.
Further introduction of guests. Seeing none. Without objection, the following bills are special ordered to the end of the calendar, and this is just so that we get the floor amendments and everybody can read them. In the Committee of Commerce, House Bill 261, and the Committee on Finance, Senate Bill 345. Without objection, today's FN report is adopted. Bills moved from consent by Senator Murphy in the Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, Senate Bill 372. Now we're at the consent calendar. Senator Carson moves that the consent calendar with relevant amendments as printed in the day's calendar be adopted, and that all such bills found ought to pass be ordered as follows. FN bills not waived under Senate Rule 4.5 to the Committee on Finance. Non-FN bills approved for referral to Finance by the day's FN report to the Committee on Finance, and all other bills to third reading. Are we ready for the question? All in favor of adopting the consent calendar, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The consent calendar is adopted. All right, we'll start right off, please, with election law and municipal affairs, and the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred Senate Bill 380, an act relative to moving the state primary date. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 3-1. Senator Abbas for the committee.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move SB 380 ought to pass. This bill will move the state primary and all related dates back by 3 months. The rationale behind this move is to give voters more exposure to their chosen general election candidate. Currently, if there is a primary race, it decreases the time between the primary election and general election to under 60 days when there is a recount. The informed voters of New Hampshire want to vet the candidates before they make their choices at the ballot box. Having 3 more months of campaign time will afford candidates multiple opportunities for the public to get to know them and understand their position on important issues. The Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 380. Thank you, Mr. President. If I may speak on the motion.
You're recognized.
I think the biggest part for me here is the informed voters. I think we all know, we all in this room ran campaigns before. And when you have a primary, it's very different than having a type of campaign than when you have a general election. The target audience for your message is much smaller in a primary. And I think in a general election, I think all the voters in New Hampshire, we've seen time and time again, a lot of voters, they vote mixed ballots. And I think for candidates in a general election to give more time to message to all of the constituents in your district, or especially a statewide race, continuing to have that September primary puts the voters in general at a disadvantage. So please join me and support the motion of ought to pass. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Abbas. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion? Senator Birdsall?
Mr. President, I rise in opposition to the ought to pass motion. I just want everyone to understand what impact this makes on the state Senate, because when you look at the June timeframe, we're going to be in session. This is a period of time where we have released our bills. However, we're getting the House bills. So we're in the process of doing the business of the state while our opponents are out there campaigning while we're trying to do our business. So I am very concerned that this gives a disadvantage to us. So I am going to vote against this motion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Birdsall. The bill is still on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 380. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Senate Bill 380 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred Senate Bill 381, an act prohibiting a municipality from designating a road as a private road under certain conditions. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 4-0. Senator Gray for the committee.
Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 381 FN, inexpedient to legislate. This bill would have prohibited a municipality from designating a road as a private road under certain conditions. The cost of maintaining a private road is a real concern to the property owners who live on one, and there are many throughout the state. Conflicts between the owners and the municipalities have risen due to the complex nature of the statutes that govern the roads and the property taxes charged. This legislation was an attempt to define and clarify some of those statutes. After listening to the testimony and speaking to these stakeholders, it was determined that the legislation in Senate Bill 381 would add more confusion, not less. The Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support in a motion to inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 381 FN. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 381. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of inexpedient to legislate is adopted. Thank you, Senator Avard. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which is referred Senate Bill 445, FNA, an act establishing a voter-owned elections fund for eligible candidates to Executive Council or making an appropriation to the fund. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 3-1. Senator Gray for the committee.
Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 445 FN expedient to legislate. This bill would have established a voter-owned election fund for eligible candidates to the Executive Council and made an appropriation to the fund. While the majority of this fund would be dependent on donations submitted by the voters, once established, the state would need to initially fund the cost to administer it. Testimony the committee heard that this type of program may require 2 full-time employees. Due to the state being in the middle of the budget cycle, the majority of the committee agreed that it would not be prudent at this time to move forward with this legislation. The Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support in a motion of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 445 FN. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 445. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. The motion of inexpedient to legislate is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which is referred Senate Bill 446, an act allowing voters to vote for multiple candidates for an office. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 4-0. Senator Murphy for the committee.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move Senate Bill 446, inexpedient to legislate. This bill would have changed the voting system to allow voters to vote for multiple candidates for an office. Whichever candidate got the most votes would move on, preventing someone with a small plurality of supporters from canceling the will of the voters. While the committee understands that this method of voting may be appropriate in some places, the majority does not think it is right for New Hampshire. Our state has a long history of election integrity and procedures that work well. A new voting system would require reprogramming of the e-poll books and ballot counting devices that are used throughout the state. It would also disrupt the progress being made by the Secretary of State's office on system improvements meant to keep our elections secure. The Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support on the motion of inexpedient to legislate for Senate Bill 446. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 446. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of inexpedient to legislate is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred Senate Bill 447FN, an act relative to funding for school transportation services under default budgets. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-0. Senator Perkins Quokka for the committee.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move SB 447 ought to pass with amendment. This bill, as amended, establishes a committee to study the inclusion of school transportation expenses in default budgets in order to maintain the district level's current level of services. A district's current level of services. In many communities across New Hampshire, transportation funding becomes an issue when budgets are not adopted by the legislative body, yet contracts need to be honored. The original language of SB 447 attempted to bridge the gap between funding for school transportation services and municipality default budgets. The bill as written may have unintended consequences, but the problem does still exist, and so any potential solution would benefit from a study of all options. The Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on SB 447. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Perkins Quokka. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 447. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 447 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred Senate Bill 535, an act relative to absentee ballot forms. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 2-1. Senator Perkins Quokka for the committee.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move SB 535 ought to pass. This bill is a housekeeping measure to align the absentee ballot request form with the eligibility language in RSA 657-1. Current statute states that when a National Weather Service has issued a storm warning, a person is eligible to vote absentee if the voter has concerns for his or her safety traveling in the storm. SB 535 simply adds that same language on the absentee ballot request form to maintain consistency and avoid any confusion for the voter filling out the request. Passage of SB 535 does not change or expand absentee voting policy in any way. It merely corrects two conflicting statutes. The Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass on SB 535. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Perkins Quokka. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 535. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted. Senate Bill 535 is ordered to third reading. All right, moving right along. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, to which was referred Senate Bill 387FN, an act relative to State Parks Pass pilot program for recovery centers and community health centers. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-0. Senator Waters for the committee.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 387FN ought to pass with amendment. This bill proposes a 3-year pilot program providing park passes to registered recovery and community health centers. The Department of Natural and Cultural Resources indicated a willingness to provide no-cost passes during the pilot. However, the chair of the Commission on Alcohol and Other Drugs has indicated a willingness to provide grant funding for this pilot program should this bill pass. After completing the pilot program, the initiative will likely incur an estimated overall cost of around $3,000. The committee amendment changes language from community health center to community mental health center. Furthermore, this bill recognizes the positive impacts of outdoor nature-based activities on mental health across various populations and aims to enhance the lives of individuals impacted by mental illness. The Energy and Natural Resources Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 387 FN. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Waters. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendments? The question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 387. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 387 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. Now we will move to the Committee on Finance, and the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance, to which was referred Senate Bill 97 FN, an act relative to the use of animals in product testing. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 7-0. Senator Pearl for the committee.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 97 FN ought to pass with amendment. This bill prohibits the use of animals in certain product testing and enables the Attorney General to bring a civil suit against persons using animals in certain product testing. The Senate Finance Committee amended Senate Bill 97 to require every manufacturer or contract testing facility in the state, of which there is currently none, to make available annually an electronic report on any animal testing conducted for purposes other than biomedical research, to include the number and species of animal used, the type and number of alternative test methods used, and the number of waivers used, and the purpose of the testing for all methods. Senate Finance recommends passage of SB 97 FN as amended and asks for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pearl. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendments? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, although only by a slight majority because I can barely hear. The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to rise to thank the senator from District 9 for finding a way after several years on this issue of a good way forward to make sure that New Hampshire is in conformity with state statute without creating any undue burdens on manufacturers in the state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? The question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 97. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's better. You know, that's better. The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. And Senate Bill 97 is ordered to third reading. You know, I thought that Senator Gray had all the energy and enthusiasm for election law, and it just disappeared in finance, so that was a little bit better. The clerk will please be attentive. No, the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance, to which was referred Senate Bill 217 FNA, an act establishing a rural and underserved area educator incentive program for higher education, making an appropriation therefore. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 6-1. Senator Birdsall for the committee.
Senator Birdsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 217 FNA ought to pass with amendment. This bill creates a rural and underserved area educator incentive program to be administered by the Department of Education and would appropriate general funds of $1 million in fiscal year 2024 and $2 million in 2025. The Senate Finance Committee amended Senate Bill 217 FNA to appropriate the sum of $1 for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025. This will facilitate discussions during the next biennial budget process regarding additional appropriations, and the determination of an appropriate funding mechanism. The amendment also changed the effective date to 60 days after passage. The Senate Finance Committee recommends passage of Senate Bill 217 FNA as amended and asks for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Birdsall. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there discussion on the amendment? Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to speak against the amendment of the $1 appropriation and voted against it when I was in the Committee on Finance. The bill called for help to get teachers to rural and underserved environments. We heard testimony that the difference created between a rural area and a city area could be as much as $40,000 entry fee for a teacher. Having taught in a rural environment my first year out of college, I started at $4,000. I had 5 preparations. I was the head football coach, the assistant basketball coach, and I took care of the late buses. It seems to me that if we want a quality public education, and we certainly are working to that end, we should have the courage and the conviction to finance getting teachers for rural and underserved areas. It just makes a great deal of sense to me. We ask for, and sometimes get approval, of getting people who aren't certified to go and teach for a limited amount of time. Why don't we put the time and effort and the finances behind the recruitment of qualified people to go to these rural and underserved areas? Quality education is the key to a functioning democracy. If we don't do this, we run the risk of letting our democracy fail. And certainly, in today's world, that's an issue. And that's an issue that we should deal with. Thank you, Mr. President.
On second reading, the first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any further discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, all in favor of the committee amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. I believe the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Is there a request for a roll call on the amendment? I don't see one. Okay. The bill is on second reading. It's open for further discussion and/or amendment. Senator Fenton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank my colleagues for realizing New Hampshire public schools are struggling to recruit and retain teachers, especially in rural areas that face economic disadvantages and are particularly impacted by these shortages. I understand that only $1 has been added to this, but I look forward to working with my colleagues and funding this program in the future budget. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator Fenton. The bill is still on second reading. Open for further discussion. Seeing none, the question is on ought to pass as amended. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Senate Bill 217 is ordered to third reading. All right, we've special ordered Senate Bill 345, so we're moving to Senate Bill 347. And the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance, to which was referred Senate Bill 347, an act relative to infrastructure appropriations for reimbursement to the City of Laconia. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be ought to pass by a vote of 7-0. Senator Pearl for the committee.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 347 FN ought to pass. This bill appropriates $3 million from the proceeds of the sale of the former Laconia State School campus property for the biennium ending June 30th, 25, to the Department of Administrative Services for reimbursement of the City of Laconia for expenditures related to the public water, sewer, and road infrastructure improvements needed for the development of the former Laconia State School campus property. Committee members stressed the $3 million appropriation to DAS is conditioned upon the prior successful closing of the sale of this property. The Senate Finance Committee recommends the passage of SB 347FN and asks for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pearl. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 347. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted. Senate Bill 347 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance, to which was referred Senate Bill 369 FNA, an act directing the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification to provide notice of public meetings and an opportunity for comment, creating a new position and making an appropriation therefore. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 7-0. Senator Pearl for the committee.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you again, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 369 FNA ought to pass. This bill changes requirements for public meeting notices by boards supervised by the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. Boards will be required to post meeting information at least 14 days prior to the meeting and make records available 7 days prior to the meeting, and allows the chair to add agenda items within these timeframes and mandates the boards offer opportunities for verbal and written public comments at meetings. Lastly, it establishes an additional attorney position within the OPLC and appropriates funds from the OPLC fund for the position. It is assumed the fiscal impact from this bill will occur in fiscal year 2025. The Senate Finance Committee recommends passage of Senate Bill 369 FNA and asks for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pearl. The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 369. The bill is on second reading. It is open for further discussion. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted. Senate Bill 369 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance, to which was referred Senate Bill 454 FN, an act increasing the annual real estate transfer tax revenue contribution to the Affordable Housing Fund. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 7-0. Senator Innes for the committee.
Senator Innes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 454 FN ought to pass with amendment. This bill would increase the annual transfer from the real estate transfer tax to the Affordable Housing Fund from $5 million to $10 million effective July 1st, 2024. This is not an increase in the tax, it's simply a reallocation of the distribution of existing revenue. And although housing remains one of the largest problems facing this state, and the fact this appropriation would add stability and provide certainty for the Affordable Housing Fund to continue to make investments, the committee voted to amend the bill so that any impact would not be felt until 2025. The Senate Finance Committee recommends passage of Senate Bill 454 as amended and asks for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Innes. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there discussion on the committee amendment? There is none. So the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The bill is still on second reading now. Open for further discussion. Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I recognize the fact that housing is a significant problem in the state of New Hampshire, and affordable housing is truly the issue. In the city of Manchester, you can't get a property, you can't get a rental for less than $2,000, and that's amazing. When I first moved to Manchester, I rented an apartment for $15 a week. Big difference. My issue is this, and I want my colleagues to be aware of this. We have the real estate transfer fund, the tax, okay? We already take LCHIP out of it. The counties get a piece of the action for collecting the money. We've allotted $5 million. This is another $5 million. The real estate transfer tax is underperforming as we speak. Because of the lack of inventory of housing and because of the cost of housing, there's a problem. If this continues, it will have an effect on our ability to fund things as we move forward. Be cognizant of these facts when you begin to take money from funds that exist and designate them to a different area. The general fund loses revenue. Under the focus, the last month's focus, you see where the BET is underperforming. The BPT is still in pretty good shape. But indeed, our significant revenue sources, if you begin to send portions of those revenue sources in a different direction, we're creating a problem for the general fund as we move forward. I want to make that clear to everybody. And everybody should get and read that focus every month because it gives us an indication of where we are financially. And I think you will be surprised by the underperformance of some parts of our budget and the overperformance in other areas. The fact that we are living on interest income to balance the budget is significant. Interest income depends upon the volume of money you have on hand. We are, under the government regulations, for the first time, we have been able to collect interest on government monies that come to us. The Affordable Care money, we could collect interest on that. We're collecting $77 million in interest over the course of this biennium. Just be cognizant of those facts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. The question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 454 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance, to which was referred Senate Bill 493 FN, an act relative to establishing municipal emergency disaster relief fund, loan fund to aid municipalities in a natural disaster. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to interim study by a vote of 7-0. Senator Gray for the committee.
Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 493 FN be referred to interim study. This bill sought to establish a municipal emergency disaster relief loan fund to be administered by the Department of Safety Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. It would have provided an initial one-time general fund appropriation of $5 million in FY25 for the program, which would have provided zero-interest loans, which would be repaid over a period of 5 years. The department initially stated that it would need up to 5 new positions to administer the loan program. The Senate Finance Committee members agreed. Discussion regarding this program would be better suited within the confines of the biennial budget process and recommends that Senate Bill 493 FN be referred to interim study and asks for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. The motion is re-referred to interim study. Is there any discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of refer for interim study on Senate Bill 493. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. The motion of refer for interim study is adopted. Senator Soucy, you have some special guests.
I do. Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of myself, Senator D'Alessandro, and Senator Murphy, I'd like all of you to join with us in greeting our friends from the Greater Manchester Leadership Program that are here today.
Thank you again, and welcome to the State House. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Health and Human Services, to which was referred Senate Bill 319 FN, an act relative to vaccine and pharmaceutical products purchased, promoted, and distributed by the state in its political subdivisions. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to interim study by a vote of 4-1. Senator Prentice for the committee.
Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 319 be referred to interim study. Senate Bill 319 prohibits the state and its political subdivisions from purchasing, promoting, or distributing any vaccine or pharmaceutical product that has not been tested with voluntary human clinical trials. This bill seeks to address a problem that is not occurring. Every product that is currently being purchased, promoted, or distributed by the Department of Health and Human Services has met the essential human safety trials. There are extensive federal regulations and international agreements that prohibit involuntary human trials. Further, the department is unsure how this bill would be implemented given that it is vague and lacks clinically significant language. Annual influenza vaccines and any vaccine that is regularly updated would be captured by Senate Bill 319 because those updates and boosters do not need to go through the same initial testing protocols because they have been proven safe and effective at their initial launch. This bill would harm public health and hinder the important work being done by our dedicated healthcare professionals. For these reasons, a majority of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee asks for your support on the motion to refer to interim study for Senate Bill 319 FN. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. The motion is refer for interim study. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of refer for interim study. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 319 is referred for interim study. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Health and Human Services, to which was referred Senate Bill 352 FNA, an act establishing an early detection cancer screening pilot program for active and retired firefighters. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 5-0. Senator Birdsall for the committee.
Senator Birdsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 352 FNA ought to pass with amendment. Senate Bill 352 establishes an early detection cancer screening pilot program in the Department of Safety, Division of Fire Standards and Training and Emergency Medical Services for retired and full-time active firefighters of New Hampshire. Firefighters face significant occupational risks every day, not just from the active threats while fighting fires and saving lives, but also from the chemicals and equipment they're exposed to while doing so. In fact, 75% of firefighters added to the International Association of Firefighters Fallen Firefighter Memorials since 2019 have died from occupation-related cancer. Early detection is critical to preventing those cancers from spreading and giving the firefighters every chance to recover. The committee amendment is a clerical amendment by the authors of the bill to streamline the process, ensuring the pilot program gets off the ground and the firefighters can receive the assistance that they require. For these reasons, the Senate Health and Human Services Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 352 FNA. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Birdsall. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question before us is adoption of the committee amendment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. We are now on ought to pass as amended. The bill is open for further discussion. Senator Carson.
President. I rise in support of Senate Bill 352 as amended. Mr. President, this bill is critical for us, the state, to support our first responders. Our police, they're not included, but especially our firefighters. We've learned that the clothes that they are required to wear is infiltrated with PFAS. And we all know how devastating that has been for our constituents here in the state of New Hampshire. We talk a lot about preventative measures. Mr. President, this is a preventative measure. We need to take care of the people that take care of us every single day. So I would ask this body to please support Senate Bill 352. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator Susi.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I certainly would echo the comments of both my colleagues on this important issue. It's one that has been a long time coming, and I think for those who heard testimony within the committee, you know that this is a bill that's not just about doing this detection so that cancers can be detected early and treated earlier. It's a bill that in the long term will save money, because the treatments for early detection are far less expensive. But most importantly, for those that testified, this is a bill that will save lives. Because without this early detection, without this screening, as my colleague from District 19 said, 75% of the people added to the Fallen Memorial didn't die in the line of duty while actively fighting a fire. They died because of cancer. This is a critical step to save those lives so that more people can stay on the job and, most importantly, be with their families. So I would encourage all of my colleagues to please support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Susi. The question is on adoption of the motion of ought to pass as amended. Is there any further discussion? Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 352 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. 2-minute recess.
Thank you.
Senator Whitley, you have some very special guests.
I do. Please join me in welcoming the rest of the fourth graders from Maple Street School in Hopkinton.
Okay, the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Judiciary, to which was referred House Bill 135 FN, an act prohibiting no-knock warrants, having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill ought to pass with an amendment. The vote 4-1, Senator Chamley, but
Just so that everybody is clear, this bill, Senate Bill 135, we special ordered, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, for consideration of a floor amendment. We've already adopted the committee amendment. Okay, so normally I'd say the bill is on second reading, but we're beyond that. Okay, so we've adopted the committee amendment. The bill is on second reading. It's open for further discussion and or floor amendment. And Senator Chamley, Senator Carson is recognized, I apologize, for a floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to introduce floor amendment number 0575S and to be able to speak to my motion.
Senator Carson is recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment, very, very simply, just removed one word from the amendment that was passed by the committee on a vote to 4-1. This bill itself, and I'll speak just a second to the bill, had a lot of attention paid to it. We've done a lot of work on it, and I feel that it's at a point where it can pass, and this is the amendment. This amendment has been reviewed by everyone involved, the chiefs, the police, as well as our Attorney General, and they are fine with the existing language. So I just want to point out the one word that has been removed. If you look at the amendment, it reads on line 21, recognizable and identifiable as a law enforcement officer. The word uniformed was removed right after as a, and that was on the suggestion of the Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire. So I would ask all of you to please support amendment number 0575S. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. The question is on adoption of the floor amendment, but there's further discussion. Senator Whitley, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the floor amendment and want to thank my colleague from District 14 for really doing yeoman's work in bringing together a lot of disparate stakeholders to get to this piece of policy. I think when you're working with so many folks, of course not everyone gets what they want, but I think this is critical and important policy that's going to move our state forward and be incredibly responsive to a lot of the conversations that have been happening nationally and locally. So I want to thank my colleague from District 14 and urge the body to vote yes on the floor amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I do agree that adding the uniform, striking the uniform requirement is an improvement, but I just want to emphasize some issues that I see in this. And if you go really where it says there's no exception to the fruit of the poisonous tree analysis. So in the event there was an issue with the no-knock warrant, normally what would happen is if they can make a demonstration that that evidence could have been independently obtained, it could still be used in a criminal prosecution. This would eliminate that exception. You look on the second page where there's exigent circumstances as an exception, which is an existing exception to a warrant. In the event that there was a mistake and the court didn't agree with the officer's discretion that they used at the time they executed the warrant, all the evidence would be excluded without exception, despite the fact that they still had a valid search warrant. I also thought that when it comes to the computer evidence, we should expressly include child pornography as one of the exceptions where you would allow a no-knock warrant. I know that sometimes when the data can be scrubbed from a computer quickly, sometimes it can be recovered. Technology's constantly changing. I will say in my professional capacity outside of this chamber, I've worked on some cases in the criminal defense field. Without getting into details, I look at these laws and analyze them, and I see how sometimes cases can fall apart defending people who are being charged with crimes. And I just see in here there's perhaps some unintended consequences that we really need to consider, because we're talking about some very serious situations here. And you hear the term loophole, and I don't like that term, but what happens when you hear someone beats a charge for that reason is because you have a situation where evidence was suppressed and they can't use it because of a technical mistake that they made. There's often exceptions to those technical mistakes, but this would eliminate any exception in regards to the execution of the no-knock warrant. So I would ask, respectfully, my colleagues to join me in opposition to not just the going forward, but defeating the motion that's on the table.
Thank you, Senator Ravis. Senator Susi, a question of?
The question for the senator from District 14. Senator, it's my understanding that no-knock warrants are extraordinary in this state and only used by a very limited, perhaps only one community in our state. If that's the case, could you tell me if the few law enforcement officials that use this have been consulted and what their opinion is?
Thank you very much for the question, Senator. Yes, in fact, I had a meeting with the Manchester Chief of Police. In fact, I've had more than one with the Manchester Chief of Police. And he brought in the individual who is in charge of the unit that does this type of work. And they are in favor of this amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Senator Carson.
A couple of interesting points have been brought up during this discussion, and I'd like to just point out some language here. My colleague from District, I think, 22, has brought up the point that he wanted child pornography included. Quite honestly, and it might be my fault, I don't recall a discussion concerning child pornography, but I would bring your attention to line 20, where it says, if an exceptional circumstances arise, such as, but not limited to, human trafficking or missing persons, the issue of child pornography can be addressed in that particular section. If that's an issue that the police have determined that's what they're there for. The meeting that I had with the people that do this was really interesting, and they talked about what they do. They no longer use these things that we see on TV where they're just banging in the door. It is a very well orchestrated and very precise entry. And they really use a lot of technology. So they know what they're going in for, they know what they're looking for. They send in either, advanced technology or a dog. They use drones. There's a lot of different things that they use. So that was one issue. The other deals with the evidence. Mr. President, we have something, and I'm just going to use a term that's used, term of art if you want to call it, fruit of the poison tree, where someone goes in and they didn't follow the letter of the law. Whatever, they made a mistake, they didn't get a warrant, they didn't do proper procedure. When that happens, evidence is thrown out. From my understanding of this, again, that even though it says it's excluded, they can still try and make a case. And Mr. President, our chief law enforcement officer read this and didn't have a problem with it. So for those reasons, I would ask the body to support amendment number 0575S and support the bill as amended. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Further discussion. Senator Ravis.
I just want to clarify what's on page 3, which is really beginning on line 20. That exception would allow an exception to the no-knock warrant rule if they were trying to locate the victim. And when you're dealing with child pornography issues, finding the victim is often very difficult. A lot of that is done in foreign countries. I'm talking about gaining the access to the actual hardware where you can prosecute the person who's in possession of those images. That's where there's concerns. I understand that there's ways to retract some of the data that's been wiped, but it's not always the case. But that, I don't believe that that exception would fall under here. The fruit of the poisonous tree analysis, it's the previous speaker is correct. That is an exclusionary rule for evidence, but again, there's several exceptions that exist under the law that will allow that evidence to come in. Most notably, if you can show an independent way of obtaining that evidence. This does not allow for that analysis to be done. So all the evidence is excluded, and there's no exception. There goes the case. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Abbas. Okay, the question is on adoption of the floor amendment 0575. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass on the floor amendment is adopted. So the question now is on ought to pass as amended. Is there any further discussion? Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. House Bill, I've been saying Senate Bill, I apologize. House Bill 135 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Transportation, to which was referred Senate Bill 580 FN, an act relative to establishing a noise barrier on T-Berry Lane, Bedford, New Hampshire. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 5-0. Senator Ricciardi for the committee.
Senator Ricciardi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 580 FN ought to pass. This bill sought to mandate the construction of a noise barrier on T-Berry Lane in Bedford. This neighborhood in my district has been dealing with excessive noise and related issues from the nearby highway for more than a decade, and the problem continues to grow worse. While this neighborhood qualifies for a noise barrier according to the noise decibel levels that the DOT requires, it does not meet the necessary density requirements to receive a noise barrier. Because there are communities around the state faced with similar issues, I will be introducing a floor amendment to address statewide needs for noise barrier construction projects, and I'd like to speak to that amendment.
Thank you very much, Senator Ricciardi. The bill is on second reading. Obviously, we're in the discussion phase, and I think, Senator Ricciardi, you are recognized to introduce Amendment 546.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm introducing a floor amendment to Senate Bill 580 that will establish the Noise Barrier Construction Fund and authorize the sale of toll credits to fund it. The Commissioner of the Department of Transportation will be able to sell up to $10 million each year in toll credits if there are sufficient credits for the state to match federal appropriation and upon proper approval and compliance with regulations. This will allow the Department of Transportation to complete noise barrier construction projects that meet qualifications for Type 2 noise barrier criteria. The amendment will give municipalities around the state the opportunity to receive noise barrier construction when needed. And I have to give a lot of credit to my friend and colleague from District 4 who worked tirelessly to come up with a solution to fund this big problem that we have in the state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ricciardi. The question is on adoption of Floor Amendment 546. Are you ready for the question? Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of this amendment, and I would also like to thank Senator Waters, our colleague from District 4, for his hard work on finding a solution to this problem. This truly was a bipartisan effort. Not only was it the senator from District 4, the senator from District 6, as well as the senator from District, I gotta look here. No, sorry. 19 involved on working on solving this problem. We've had this problem come before us a number of times, and we're at the first step, Mr. President. We're finding a way to create the funding. And I think that's an important first step, and I would ask my colleagues to please support the amendment and the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator D'Alessandro to speak on the amendment.
Yes, Mr.
Yes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. As always, creativity is the hallmark of the New Hampshire State Senate. The creation of doing something with nothing is magnificent. Magnificent. I applaud Senator Waters. I applaud Senator Rashadi. I applaud Senator Carson. Toll credits, the magic of toll credits. You know, there is a mysticism about them. Where are they? They're floating around, and we gather them on a continual basis, and we use them. I think I wholeheartedly support the amendment. I support creativity and the magnificence of coming up with unique solutions to difficult problems. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. I thought you were going to go off on talk about congregate housing, too, and creativity. All right, the amendment is open for further discussion. Seeing none. All in favor of floor amendment 546, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading and open for further discussion and/or amendment. Are you ready for the question of ought to pass as amended on House Bill 580? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I said House Bill, I meant Senate Bill. I apologize. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Senate Bill 580 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred Senate Bill 305 FN, an act relative to allowing wholesalers of cigarettes to retain tax revenue collected for each package of cigarettes with tax stamps sold. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 3-2. Senator Innes for the committee.
Senator Innes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to table Senate Bill 305.
Senator Innes has moved to table Senate Bill 305, which is not debatable. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. The motion to table is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred Senate Bill 363 FN, an act relative to wagering on simulcast dog racing. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-1. Senator D'Alessandro for the committee.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 363 ought to pass with amendment. This bill will end the simulcasting of dog racing in New Hampshire. Currently, only 2 facilities in New Hampshire are licensed to simulcast dog racing, and the only one doing so is the Brook in Seabrook. The Brook receives its simulcast signal from West Virginia, which is the only state in the United States that still offers dog racing. The Ways and Means Committee heard compelling testimony about inhumane practices and injuries sustained by the dogs, and therefore believes it is appropriate to take steps to end the simulcasting of dog racing in New Hampshire. The committee amendment pushes out the effective date to January 1st, 2027. This bill will provide the town of Seabrook time to plan for the loss of funding to the town as a result of the passage of this bill. We ask your support for the motion of ought to pass with amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 363. Ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 363 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred Senate Bill 433, an act relative to establishing a commission to study the enforcement collection of taxes on electronic cigarettes. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-0. Senator Lang for the committee.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 433 ought to pass with amendment. This bill creates a study commission to study the marketing of e-cigarettes and e-liquid in New Hampshire, as well as the compliance with the cigarette tax. There were concerns within the industry about unequal enforcement and application of the tax. This commission will work to fix that. The committee amendment fixes an inconsistency in the language of the original bill, and it clarifies this is a study commission, not a study committee. The Ways and Means Committee asks for your support for a motion of ought to pass with amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lang. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? The question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading, open for further discussion and/or floor amendment, and I recognize Senator D'Alessandro to introduce Amendment 570.
Thank you, Mr. President. I offer Amendment 50570S. The amendment reduces the number of senators to one. So thank you for your support. That's it.
Senator D'Alessandro.
That is it.
You're protecting the Senate. Thank you.
Please protect the Senate.
All right, the question is on adoption of Floor Amendment 570. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. It's still open for further discussion or amendment. Seeing no further discussion, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 433. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Senate Bill 433 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred Senate Bill 435, an act relative to New Hampshire Unit Trust statute. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-0. Senator D'Alessandro for the committee.
Senator D'Alessandro, you're busy today.
Thank you, Mr. President. I get extra for this. Do I get that bonus?
You can have my 25.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 435 ought to pass with amendment. This bill consolidates the New Hampshire Unit Trust statute into one title and eliminates duplicate statutes. Over the years, this legislature has passed numerous bills that have helped foster a world-class environment in New Hampshire for trust and trust services. We've provided settlers and their advisors with cutting-edge estate planning techniques while making New Hampshire's trust laws clear and user-friendly. This bill furthers these efforts by allowing more flexibility in the creation of a unit trust. Unit trusts are used as a vehicle to provide gifts to charitable causes. This bill also corrects a potential conflict with federal tax law standards. These changes will keep New Hampshire in line with other trust-friendly states. The committee amendment simply corrects a small typo in a statutory reference in the bill. We ask your support for the motion of ought to pass with amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. The bill is on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? The question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? The Question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 435. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 435 is ordered to third reading. All right, we are now at conclusion of the regular calendar, but for the two special ordered bills. I would suggest a 5-minute recess. Senator Susi, do you want to use the anteroom first? Sure. And can I talk to you for 1 second? So the Senate will be in recess. Okay, the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Commerce, to which was referred, House Bill 261, an act authorizing residential tenants to terminate their lease in instance of domestic violence or following a disabled illness or accident. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-0. Senator Chanley for the committee.
Senator Chanley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 261 ought to pass with amendment. This bill would allow residential tenants to terminate their leases in instances of domestic violence or following a disabling illness or accident. The committee amendment would remove certain of these provisions and would also bring the domestic violence language in line with protections provided by the Federal Violence Against Women Act. The Commerce Committee several weeks ago asked for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on House Bill 261. And Mr. President, if I could speak for myself, I'd appreciate that.
Do you want to speak now or when you introduce the floor amendment?
Just right now for a
You're
second.
recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just want to ask that we vote down the committee amendment so that another amendment may be introduced that is more comprehensive. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chanley. The bill is on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment, which Senator Chanley has asked that it be voted down. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Are you ready for the question? Seeing none, all in favor of the committee amendment say aye. And all opposed? That was good. All right, I recognize Senator Chanley to introduce Amendment 574.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am pleased to offer Amendment 2024-0574S for consideration.
And you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So this amendment, 0574, introduces updates to RSA 540, New Hampshire's tenancy statute, that will allow victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking to break a lease. This amendment balances the specific needs, safety needs of victims with the financial liability concerns of landlords. It establishes a clear process that victims must follow when it comes to providing documentation to landlords and clarifies the legal framework to manage this process while also enabling other landlord-tenant procedures to move forward. This outlines pathways victims can use to provide documentation to landlords when they are in fear for their safety. It also adds a provision to, in doing so, it adds a provision to create New Hampshire-specific self-certification form modeled after the VAWA self-certification, which will include language to prevent false statements. This amendment would protect victim confidentiality while ensuring that victim statements can be used in health or safety evictions against their abusers. It creates a process for landlords to terminate the lease of abusive co-tenants. It clarifies tenant liability for rent owned when terminating the lease and how and when security deposits will be returned. It clarifies RSA 540:11-B, Roman numeral 4, only limits liability for rent and not damages caused by the victim tenant. Mr. President, I believe that this amendment reflects the best of our legislative endeavors because this brought together legislators and stakeholders with disparate priorities to work together to develop an amendment, to develop the amendment before you. This legislation, simply put, mitigates the safety and financial risks to both landlords and victims of domestic violence. I ask for your support. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chandler. Is there any further discussion on Floor Amendment 574? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? All in favor of the floor amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted. The bill is still on second reading, open for further discussion and amendment. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. House Bill 261 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance, to which was referred Senate Bill 345 FN, an act relative to state park fees for state residents. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to interim study by a vote of 6-1. Senator Rosenwald for the committee.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 345 FN be referred to interim study. This bill would require the Commissioner of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources to set state park fees charged to residents of New Hampshire to be no more than 50% of the fees for entry to state parks charged to non-residents. It would allow the Commissioner to set separate fee schedules for residents and non-residents for specific uses within any state park. The Finance Committee was unable to determine the financial impact of the proposal. The state park system is state-funded, it's managed efficiently, and the majority of our parks do not charge any fees at all. Additionally, the Fiscal Committee has the authority to set fees for skiing at Cannon Mountain Park and state park camping fees, and they are not set at 50% for residents. The Senate Finance Committee recommends Senate Bill 345 FN be referred to interim study and ask for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Rosenwald. The motion is referred for interim study. Is there further discussion? Senator Murphy.
Mr. President, I ask the body to overturn this motion so that a floor amendment addressing some concerns may be brought forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Again, the motion is referred for interim study. If you're in favor of that, you'd say aye. If you're opposed, you would say no. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The noes have it. Senator Murphy, you are recognized to introduce floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're recognized to move ought to pass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move ought to pass on Senate Bill 345.
Senator Murphy has moved ought to pass, and now you're recognized to introduce Amendment 576.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Amendment 0576S and ask to speak to the amendment.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill was brought forward at the request of one of my constituents dealing with park fees, and just to be clear, it deals with park entry fees, not boat rentals, not camping, park entry fees. The bottom line from my perspective, Mr. President, is that our residents, our citizens own the parks. They own them. And there's no reason why our citizens should be paying the same fee that is being charged to people who visit from out of state. And by the way, Massachusetts and Maine charge significantly more than we do, and significantly more for our visitors that visit their states than their own citizens. This amendment, simple amendment, changes the effective date to April 1st, 2025, and it does so to address the main concern brought forward by the department, which was that they would not have time to implement a disparate fee structure. They are not concerned about making less money. Their conversations with me all indicated they would make more money, and they're under a mandate to operate it like a business. Making more money is part of that mandate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Is there any further discussion on the floor amendment? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted. The bill is still on second reading and open for further discussion and amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Senate Bill 345 is ordered to third reading. All right. We have one bill removed from consent. We're now at the conclusion of the regular calendar. We'll take up the bill that was removed, and the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, to which was referred Senate Bill 372 FN, an act relative to plumbing apprenticeships. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to interim study by a vote of 5-0. Senator Pearl for the committee.
Senator Pearl. Senator Pearl yields, excuse me, to Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to table this bill.
Senator Murphy has moved to table Senate Bill 372, which is a non-debatable motion. All in favor of the motion to table Senate Bill 372, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Senate Bill 372 is adopted, and that bill is laid on the table. Yay. I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the late session, that the business of the late session be in order at the present time, that all bills and resolutions ordered to third reading be by this resolution read a third time, all titles be the same as adopted, and that they be passed at the present time.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The early session is adjourned. We are now in the late session. Are there any announcements or personal privileges to come before the Senate? Well, I have one. First of all, many thanks for the food that was in the anteroom. So just a little bit on the schedule. We have what I think will be a fairly busy day next week. Even though there are only 25 bills on the regular calendar, I suspect there'll be some debate on them, so be prepared for a longish day. Speaking of debate, I want to apologize to Senator Prentice for being a little curt last week, and I shouldn't have done it. I apologize for that. You'll be able to tell me to let you speak in the future, and everybody else. So, schedule. We talked about the 15th, probably a long day. The 21st, which is the day before the break. There are several of us that are trying to get away on the 22nd, and a couple of people have unavoidable commitments. So, I have spoken with Senator Soucy. We've agreed that the committees that normally meet Wednesday morning will meet. That's HHS, ED&A, and Ways and Means, but try to get through the bills in a timely fashion so that we can have at least a brief caucus, and we'll come in at 1 o'clock. I suspect it'll be a longish day. We'll see what happens. But if we can finish our day, then we'll be able to, those of us that have commitments on the 22nd will be able to keep them, and some of them are out-of-state type of commitments, so they're important. On the 21st, there is one member who is likely to be a little bit late getting here, so if there are roll calls before that member arrives, I think with unanimous consent, we'll just defer the roll calls until that member has arrived. And that is that. Oh, and the last thing, the Senate clerk has a new staff member. Tammy, do you want to introduce him?
You can. Whoops. John, one of you want to stand up? This is John Shortis. He's a UNH intern, and he's interning in my office in Senate Research.
And lastly, looking ahead, as we get into March, my thought at this point is that we'll be in session on the first Thursday, which is the 7th, but likely not on the 14th, so that committees can, especially the Finance Committee, has plenty of time for deliberations on that week. That will be the plan, but it's a tentative plan, okay? So, I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the business of the day being completed, that the Senate recess to the call of the chair for the purposes of introducing legislation, re-referring bills to committee, scheduling hearings, sending and receiving messages, vacating bills, and processing enrolled bill reports and amendments. And when we recess to the call of the chair.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Senators in recess to the call of the chair.